for 18 to 21-year-olds to buy semi-automatic weapons, weapons like the AR-15, as well as school safety measures and investments in mental health. Remember, the killers in Buffalo and Uvalde were 18. They used semi-automatic AR-15 style weapons. This would not, though, be a ban on sales to those under 21 of those style of weapons, which the president has called for, but an adjustment. We'll have details here in just a moment. Since Friday, gun violence killed more than a dozen people and injured dozens more in at least 13 mass shootings in the United States. And this morning, new insight into last month's school shooting in Uvalde from a teacher who stared down the gunman.
The kids started asking out loud, Mr. Reyes, what is going on? And I said, I don't know what's going on, but let's go ahead and get under the table. Get under the table and act like you're asleep. As they were doing that, and I was gathering them under the table and told them to act like they were going to sleep, is about the time when I turned around and saw him standing there.
For more, I want to bring in Rosa Flores, who is live in Uvalde, Texas. What a horrifying glimpse into that classroom on that day, Rosa.
Brianna, these details are chilling. Let me take you through these details. Now, the man that you just saw and heard, his name is Arnulfo Reyes. He's a teacher at Robb Elementary School, and he spoke to ABC News, and he says that on that ill-fated day, he was in his classroom with his 11 students. They were all watching a movie when gunshots rang out. And his students, of course, turned to his teacher and asked him what was going on. He says that he told his students to go under the table and pretend that they were sleeping. That's when he says that he turned around and saw the gunman. He saw the gunman right there and that the gunman opened fire. Reyes says that he was shot multiple times. The gunman hit his arm, his lungs, and also his back. This teacher says that at that point, he couldn't move, but he did see that the gunman then turned the weapon on his students. Take a listen.
One of the students from the next door classroom was saying, "Officer, we're in here, we're in here." But they had already left. And then he got up from behind my desk, and he walked over there and he shot over there again.
Now process this with me for just a second. As I said, Mr. Reyes says that there's 11 students in this classroom when the gunman opens fire. He says that none of his students survive. All of those children died, he says. Reyes goes on to say that for 77 minutes, he played dead in this classroom, surrounded by his students. And Brianna, we've been covering this from the get-go. There's so many questions about this investigation. We know that officers were there, and as you described, he heard the officers just outside the classroom. He said that he heard the students asking for help. And of course, we know now that those officers did not go in there and stop the threat. What stopped the threat in this case was a federal law enforcement officer who eventually went into that classroom, shot and killed the shooter. Brianna.
I don't think I can process that, Rosa. I imagine you can't either as you try to understand what happened there. Rosa Flores, thank you.
So witnesses who interacted with the far-right Proud Boys on the day of the Capitol attack are among those scheduled to testify at the January 6th committee's first public hearing, which is Thursday night. This is extra significant now that the Justice Department has charged the head of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, and 4 other leaders with seditious conspiracy in the Capitol attack. This just happened, escalating the criminal case against members of the Proud Boys. CNN senior national correspondent Sarah Seidner joins us now. And Sarah, you have done unique and groundbreaking reporting on the Proud Boys, including conversations after the January 6th attack with Enrique Tarrio, the leader, who wasn't there on that day.
Yeah.
But what did he tell you as part of these discussions, and did the subject of planning come up?
You know, we should talk about a little bit about the new indictment because it does bring some fresh detail. Because as you mentioned, Enrique Tarrio, who was then the chairman of the Proud Boys National Organization, wasn't even in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. But the government says he was involved in the planning and then responded afterwards as well with glee and joy as to what was happening inside the Capitol, those pictures that we all saw of people going in, breaking in, and terrifying members of Congress. In the latest indictment, we noticed some things that were different because in the very beginning, several members of the Proud Boys were charged. He was not. But this new indictment talks about encrypted messages that were being sent, that were created, an encrypted group that was created by Enrique Tarrio, according to the indictment, and that was shared with dozens, eventually, of Proud Boys. But a few of the core group that are listed in this indictment were aware of what the government says were planning tactics, tactical planning, getting things like armor, getting things like hotel rooms, planning on where they were going to be, where they were going to meet. And so it's really interesting to read through some of the conversation that was going on there between Enrique Tarrio and some of the members and his response to all of that happened. He talked about in the communications, he was talking with a person that was talking about a plan to occupy several buildings, including the House and the Senate, and that they wanted to flood it with as many people as possible. So a lot of details here that explain why these charges have just come up now. I do want to talk to you about what happened in February 24th, after the charges against some of his Proud Boys were already put in place, but he had not been charged. We were able to sit down with him. I have talked to Enrique Tarrio for many, many years, over the years, and he agreed to sit down with me. And I asked him about the people who had been charged and whether he condemned them. Let's listen.
So, was it a mistake to even go into the Capitol?
Was it?
Yes.
Do you condemn those who went in, vandalized, threatened police officers, broke windows? Do you condemn those people? Can you say that right now?
Okay, I can't say that because I think
Why not?
condemn is a very strong word, and I think it's a little bit too strong.
What happened was really violent and very strong, right?
I'm only responsible, I guess to speak, I'm only responsible for what the Proud Boys did, right? And you listed a whole thing. And I'd like to go through that. There's 8 members of the Proud Boys that decided to go in. I think that was a mistake to go in. But they're painting it like as like we coordinated to go into the Capitol previously, and that's untrue.
So let's just parse what he said. He says there, again, this is before he was indicted. He says there, we didn't plan this. This was not coordinated. And he didn't go all the way to condemn those who went in, but he says it was wrong. That is a very different story than you are getting from the details that are inside this indictment in these encrypted messages going back and forth between him and people who were there, like his very close buddy, Joe Biggs.
Talk to me about Joe Biggs, because you also spoke to him.
I did, very briefly, very different scenario. Once the indictments came down, we decided to go and try to speak to some of the people who were charged with the most aggressive charges, the Proud Boys being some and the Oath Keepers as well. We have an exchange here between me and Joe Biggs. We went to his home to see if he would to speak to us. We tried calling him. He did not respond, so we went directly to his home. And in this exchange, you will hear him deny some of the things. Let's listen to that.
Oh, it's right there.
Yeah. This guy is one of the most well-known, a far-right personality known for spouting extremist views long before January 6th.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Joe Biggs.
37-year-old Joseph Biggs is an Army veteran. He is also a leader in the far-right, violence-prone Proud Boys. His violent rhetoric got him banned on social media sites. On January 6th in Washington, D.C., it wasn't just rhetoric. Prosecutors say he did aid, abet, counsel, command, induce, or procure others to unlawfully enter the U.S. Capitol by means of destruction of federal property. This is Biggs as he helps lead the Proud Boys to the Capitol steps. Once there, one of his Proud Boys, this guy, broke into the Capitol. According to court documents, 20 seconds later, Biggs is seen inside the building. Biggs is charged for an alleged commanding role in the insurrection. A judge ordered he could go home on house arrest. We visited him there. Mr. Biggs, I'm Sarah with CNN. Look, all we want to ask you is whether or not you were in the Capitol on January 6th and what you were doing there. I'm sorry? You're calling the police, you said? Are you an insurrectionist?
He later goes on to threaten me, curse at me, and say he was going to call the police. At that point in time, we left. But you see video of him there on January 6th, front and center, sort of walking with a whole bunch of guys, some of them Proud Boys, some of them not, as they are going around the Capitol. And in this indictment, it is those encrypted messages that seem to be the key to why all of these people are charged with seditious conspiracy, which is the most difficult, most largest charge that we've seen brought, the most serious charge that we've seen brought against anybody, including those in the Oath Keepers. They are the only two groups that have, and let me just tell you, how did this happen? Why is this happening now? It appears that one of the Proud Boys cooperated, and so the government was able to get more information.
We have a lot more to learn about how they got from the previous charges to these charges. There's more information, no doubt, that will come out, but it's fascinating to hear your conversation with them in that moment in time. Sarah Snyder, terrific reporting. Thank you so much. Brianna?
We do have new CNN reporting this morning on a military investigation into whether a U.S. service member carried out an insider attack against a base in northern Syria. 4 Americans were injured in this attack back in April. CNN's Barbara Starr is live for us at the Pentagon. Barbara, what can you tell us?
Well, good morning, Brianna. We've been tracking this since it happened in April, and now the U.S. military is confirming it's investigating a military member for the possibility of whether that person deliberately, in the middle of the night, set off 2 rounds of explosives at a U.S. military base in northeastern Syria. For the first time now, U.S. military investigators providing CNN with a statement, and let me just read it in part. It does say, and I quote, "A possible suspect, a U.S. service member, has been identified. At this point, these are just allegations. All suspects are presumed to be innocent unless convicted in a court of law." So this whole incident began on the night of April 7th at a place called Green Village in northeastern Syria. At that time, there were 2 explosions. The military put out a statement saying they believed they had taken fire from forces outside the base, a rocket or a mortar, and it does happen in that region of northeastern Syria. But then a week later, they corrected themselves with a new statement, and it says the explosions in Green Village were not the result of indirect fire, but rather the deliberate placement of explosive charges. What we know is, as you said, 4 military members suffering traumatic brain injury. The explosions we are told, were not insignificant, larger than a hand grenade, if you will. So now we know that a military member has been being investigated. No charges filed, no one's in custody, and right now, the really open question, of course, what was the motivation? Why would some service member do this to their fellow colleagues? Brianna?
Yeah, huge question. Barbara Starr live for us at the Pentagon. Thank you. And joining us now to talk about this is CNN national security analyst Peter Bergen. I think we both remember when this happened, and it seemed like it was an attack from outside, and then it seems they learned, no, this came from within potentially their ranks. What do you think about this development?
I mean, it's less uncommon than we might think. I mean, just think about Fort Hood, Texas, where Major Nidal Hassan, an Army psychologist, killed 13 people. There was another attack at Fort Hood, Texas by Specialist Lopez in 2014 that killed 3 people. There was an attack by a U.S. military contractor not far from where we're sitting in Navy Yard in several years ago, which killed 13 people. And so this happens. I mean, look, there are 2 million members of the armed services, active duty, reserves, National Guard. There are hundreds of thousands of contractors. They suffer the same issues that the normal population suffers, except they're under even more stress if they're in a war zone. But I do think this is quite unusual. When we think about insider threats, usually in places like Afghanistan or Iraq, usually that's a Iraqi who comes in, carries out some kind of an attack or or an Afghan. We saw a lot of that in Afghanistan. You remember
From a partner security
from
force.
a partner security force. So, like, recall when General Scotty Miller, the commanding general of Afghanistan, pulled his own weapon in 2018 because there was an insider attack that actually wounded an American brigadier general. So, but yeah, this is, I mean, it's unusual, particularly in a war zone. And particularly, what's interesting about this also is this person appears to have wanted to get away with it. I mean,
Yes.
often when these attacks happen, Major Nadal Hassan, he saw himself as a jihadist hero. He went in, he killed the 13 people, unfortunately, at Fort Hood, was wounded himself in the attack. I mean, he didn't try and disguise it. Here, this seems like a surreptitious attack. Motives unclear.
So that is the question then. Does that tell you anything about the motive of whether it may or may not be a political statement? Because we really don't know much about that at this point.
Well, that's an interesting question because, yeah, I think if it was political, that you'd make a statement yourself. This seems like maybe it's a private vendetta. I mean, we don't know, but it doesn't seem like an attack where we've seen a jihadist carry out an attack and sort of announce the fact that he is carrying out the attack. We saw that in Pensacola, Florida, with an insider attack by a Saudi military officer in 2019 who killed 3 U.S. sailors. So it doesn't look like it's political in that sense.
Well, we'll see how this plays out in the disciplinary process, and then hopefully we'll be learning more details there. Peter, thank you as always for your insights.
Thank you, Brianna.
So it is Election Day, and CNN senior data reporter Harry Etten watching a number of races across the country today, including the most populous state, California. Some really important races there, Harry.
Yeah, I don't oftentimes go in and do district attorney races, but this one has got me going. So Chesa Boudin, who is the incumbent DA, is facing a recall. It's a simple yes/no on whether to recall, thanks to a petition drive. A lot of Republicans got involved in that. And more than that, this to me is a statement about where the country might be going. He's one of a number of progressives who have been targeted in recalls. There are a lot of progressive DAs out there in the country that got elected over the last few years. I think a lot of folks are going to be looking to this race to say, okay, the liberal city of San Francisco, can a progressive DA survive there? We'll have to wait and see and find out.
Los Angeles mayor's race.
Saying in the Golden State, this one is another interesting race. So, look, it's a nonpartisan primary. There's no party registration on the ballot. So, essentially, what you have here is a three-way. The top candidates, Karen Bass, Rick Caruso, Kevin De Leon. And Bass is running as a progressive. Caruso is running very hard on a law and order campaign. But here's the thing. Because we have multiple candidate fields, you need at least 50% of the vote plus one. Otherwise, there is a runoff in November. So even if one candidate gets, let's say leads tonight with 40% of the vote, if they don't get the 50% plus one, this election will continue to go on.
It does seem that here crime, like in San Francisco, is a major issue in this election.
Yes, that's exactly right. Rick Caruso basically came out of nowhere running on this law and order campaign. And this is something we saw in New York last year as well, right? With Eric Adams. We saw Byron Brown up in Buffalo able to survive an attempt to knock him off. And so this is one of those things. Crime is something that, even if it's not a huge national issue, it is a huge urban issue.
There is a peculiar thing on the ballot in South Dakota.
I will admit, I've done a lot of political segments with you over the last 4+ years, I think it is. I don't think we've gone to South Dakota very frequently. Not that I don't love the state of South Dakota, but look, Amendment C, it would make some ballot measures get 60% of the vote to pass instead of 50% plus one. Now, you might be saying, why would they do that? Well, Republicans wanted to get it on the ballot ahead of a Medicaid expansion ballot measure in November, so it would need to get 60% instead of 50% plus one. Obviously, a lot of Republicans don't want that ballot measure to pass.
This would make this harder to pass. While we're up in South Dakota, let's go next door.
We're going to go to the great state of Montana. We've gone to Montana a few times, more so than South Dakota. The Montana 1st Congressional District GOP primary. Why are we going there? It's because of this guy, Ryan Zinke. Donald Trump backs his former Interior Secretary Zinke. Remember, Zinke was a member of the Trump administration. And a fun little nugget, after redistricting, Montana went from 1 to 2 congressional districts.
So that's a change. This is new for them because they have a new district, a shiny new district.
A shiny new district.
Where are we in the primary calendar at this point?
The more I go, it just seems like life is passing me by more and more quickly. After today, 40% of states will have held primaries. It feels like we haven't been in the primary season that long, but yet 40% will have voted. And guess what, John? We are just 5 months until the general election in November, but we're going to have a lot of fun doing it.
The countdown is on.
The countdown is on. The heat is on.
Ariane, thank you very
Thank you,
much for
sir.
that. So a critical development in Pennsylvania's high-stakes Senate race, the health of Democrat John Fetterman under scrutiny.
Plus, a former Obama White House advisor reacts to the reported dysfunction inside the Biden White House as the president grows more frustrated over his poll numbers. And a drowning man begging to be saved. What body cam video appears to show officers doing while it happened?
Our mission here at CNN and journalists, the news comes first. That's when your heart beats a little bit faster.
More breaking news that we are following right now.
You really work as hard as you can, getting the facts.
We're learning more about our lead plot.
It is critically important.
To our viewers in the United States and around the world, welcome to the Situation Room. We have breaking news.
End of 2021, we had 7.28 million tourists that came into Dubai. Not big numbers compared to before, but very big considering the circumstances globally. Then you look at the first quarter of this year, where Expo, of course, was tail ending the second half of Expo. We had close to 4 million visitors that came in Q1. That's amazing.
You're not back at pre-COVID levels then?
Not yet,
Not
but the
yet.
spirit is there. For us as Dubai, the appetite was always to go back to pre-COVID as much as we could. So it's great the fact that the private and public sector relationship is so strong that whatever we do it together. I always talk about Dubai being almost like a board, where even the private sector have a say, and they're heard, and then things are implemented. So it's not just one person decides everything else. That's the difference about Dubai.
Nothing is ever given to you in life. If you want to be a great businessman, you got to put in the work. And the same applies to survivors of trafficking. My name is Given Kachepa, and I'm now a dentist in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in Zambia. We grew up very poor. I was trafficked into the United States by an organization known as TTT Partners in Education. The mission of the organization was to go to African countries and bring kids to America to sing in churches. We were singing in malls. We were singing in schools. So the ministry had different ways of making revenue, and yet those of us that were singing were not receiving a penny from that. My dental practice is based here in North Dallas. We've been here now 5 years. It's been an exciting, wonderful journey. My goal as a dentist in the future is opening up clinics in Zambia. We have 2 of them that we've built from the ground up. And being a business person today, I just cannot foresee a situation in which I would work somebody without compensating them for the work that they're doing. It's important to me that we all try to get along and make life a little bit easier for each other.
This is CNN.
New this morning, I'm not jumping in. That from some police officers in Tempe, Arizona, who were captured on body cam video watching a man in the water begging for help before he ultimately drowned. And now investigators are reviewing the officer's conduct and how they responded to the incident. CNN's Natasha Chen has more on this developing story. Natasha, tell us about this and how the man ended up in the water in the first place.
Yeah, Brianna, 3 officers are now on non-disciplinary paid leave pending this investigation. They initially responded to a call just after 5 a.m. on Saturday, May 28th, initially about an alleged fight between this 34-year-old man, Sean Bickings, and his companion. These officers get there, and the 2 people say there's no physical violence at all. So the city says under standard procedure, the officers ran their 2 names for a background check. And as they're running their names, they're making small talk with them. You can see that in the video. And they're talking to Bickings as they're by this railing, by this reservoir and a pedestrian bridge. The video we're about to show you from the body camera footage shows that Bickings actually climbed that railing and got in the water.
Sorry, guys. What? I'm sorry. Where you going? Huh?
What are you doing, my friend? Huh? What are you doing?
I gotta go for a swim. Right, I'm free to go, right? You can't swim in the lake, man. I'm free to go, right?
You're not allowed to swim in the lake.
You can see him swimming away there, and you can hear the officer saying that he's not allowed to swim in there, but he's also not under arrest. They can't detain him. And the city did not show the rest of this footage, saying that the actual drowning itself is very sensitive in nature, but they did give us a transcript of what happened next. Let's put that on the screen, because the officer at one point says to Bickings as he's in distress, "What's your plan now?" Bickings says, "I'm going to drown, I'm going to drown." The officer says, "No, you're not." One of the officers then tells him to try to get to a nearby pylon to hang on. Bickings continues to say, "I'm drowning, I can't." And that officer responds, "I'm not jumping in after you." At that point, fire department, the water and rescue team is called. I asked the city what happened after that point, how long it took for folks to get there and help out, because it took several hours to finally find Bickings. The Tempe Officers Association also gave us a statement, which I will read here, saying that these officers received no training in water rescues, nor do they have equipment to help people. And attempting such a high-risk rescue could actually result in the death of the person in the water and the officer who could be pulled down by a struggling adult. So at this point, the city of Tempe is reviewing its policies around water incidents like this, what type of equipment the officers need, what type of equipment is needed around bodies of water. And nearby Scottsdale Police is helping with an internal review of the training and policies in place at the point that this happened. Meanwhile, the city of Tempe is doing its death investigation, after which the state, Arizona Department of Public Safety, will review that. Brianna.
All right, Natasha Chen live for us. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Frustration within the West Wing as the White House struggles to get its message out. We are joined by former President Obama's communications director on what he thinks needs to change.
Plus, could 4-day work weeks be the thing of the future? The world's biggest trial run underway.
Back in person, the 2022 Afreximbank annual meetings will bring together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Register now.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
Sodexo was created more than 50 years ago by my father, Pierre Bellon. And it's a global catering company and services company all over the world. We have fans in stadium, we have visitors in a museum, we have guests in the conference centers, and Sodexo Life is there to make memorable experiences to all these people. I think it's very important to work with people. We have to work in team spirit. This is very important to engage them. Team spirit, team of progress. I think it's very spirit of progress is very important. We have to every day do better than the day before. You know, this is important, and also spirit of growth. This is important too.
Welcome to The Lead. We begin with breaking news. The United States has plunged into a recession. We're seeing infections at an all-time high. What's your reaction to that? Here are the facts.
The Lead with Jake Tapper. You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 80,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore CNN.com/impact. Click to take action.
I'm Eleni Jokas, and this is CNN.
When you travel the world, make sure the world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels. Connected to your world.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
This morning, Pennsylvania Democratic Senate candidate John Fetterman focusing on his recovery and staying off the campaign trail until at least next month, according to his wife, after suffering a stroke, revealing a heart condition, and admitting he almost died. Questions are growing about why the campaign was not more transparent about his health. CNN's Jeff Zeleny is live for us in Pittsburgh with more. Jeff?
Hey, good morning, Brianna. The Pennsylvania Senate race is one of the biggest contests of this midterm election year, where Democrats see their best opportunity to pick up a seat. That seat is from retiring Republican Senator Pat Toomey. But the Democratic candidate, just 5 months from tomorrow is Election Day, John Fetterman is still sidelined. And as you said, those health questions loom large over the race.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. Really.
It's been 25 days since John Fetterman has stepped onto the campaign trail in Pennsylvania. His wife, Giselle, now tells CNN he may not reappear until next month.
I think he deserves a month of break to get back and come back as strong as ever, because this is going to be a tough race and a really important race, and I want him to be fully ready for it.
So maybe in July?
Maybe, I think so. Yeah, that's my hope.
That hope is shared by Democrats, who are watching her husband's recovery from a stroke and previously undisclosed heart condition with increasing alarm in one of the nation's top Senate races. With questions and concerns mounting, Fetterman finally revealed the severity of his illness last Friday, bluntly acknowledging in a statement, "I almost died." We sat down with his wife in their hometown of Braddock, just outside Pittsburgh.
She defended their commitment to being transparent, pushing back on suggestions they downplayed his condition.
It's still a hiccup. I mean, families go through health crises. Our family is not unique in what we've gone through, only we've had to go through it very publicly.
That spotlight is likely to only intensify, considering the heart patient is now running against a celebrity heart surgeon, with Dr. Mehmet Oz finally declaring victory after his Republican primary stretched into a recount.
The primary's over. Now left-wing radicals are rolling into Pennsylvania.
Republicans are wasting no time trying to brand Fetterman as extreme, and he's pushing back by reminding Pennsylvanians that Oz moved here from New Jersey to run for Senate. Yet questions about Fetterman's health hang heavy over the race, in whispers among party officials and among some voters who privately raise their concerns. Alyssa Catalano, a friend of Fetterman's who owns a business just down the street from his home, said the family has tried to balance medical and political obligations.
Being personally close to the family, my priority at that time was like, don't just focus on getting better. Don't worry about everyone. But I understand that he has a responsibility right now. But I think that what I would say to those people is put yourself in their shoes.
Pennsylvania voters offered a mixed view.
I think that his wife will keep him on track. So I think that if his doctors feel confident that he can be released and can campaign, that I'm not concerned.
I think that it's kind of creates a dangerous situation as much for him as anything.
It wasn't until Friday that Fetterman revealed he left a series of heart issues untreated for years. In a statement, he confessed, "I should have taken my health more seriously. The stroke I suffered on May 13th didn't come out of nowhere."
I hate that he had to learn it the hard way, but I'm grateful that he's alive and will make a full recovery. And now he is the one who listens the most, not only to me, but to the doctors. And I hope that other folks can learn from him and not have to experience it like he had to.
And this morning, Fetterman is up with new campaign ads introducing himself to the general election electorate here in Pennsylvania. But again, he is not planning to campaign potentially until July. There have been so many concerns from Democrats here in the Commonwealth as well as in Washington if they would have to devise strategies perhaps to replace him on the ballot. The deadline for that is August, but in my conversation yesterday with Giselle Fetterman, she said that will not be necessary. She said he will be campaigning, and more importantly, she said his doctors believe he can too. Brianna.
So interesting to hear from her. Jeff Zeleny, thank you.
So new reporting on messaging struggles within the White House. CNN's Isaac Dover reports, quote, "Being familiar never makes the feeling less dreadful. White House aides emailing each other during one of President Joe Biden's stops on the road, tracking who's covering what he's saying and which TV channels are taking the speech live, and realizing a number of times that the answer was none. You are thinking," said one person familiar, "why are we doing this?" Joining us now is Dan Pfeiffer, former senior advisor to President Obama and White House Communications Director, and is the author of the brand new book out today, Battling the Big Lie, How Fox, Facebook, and the MAGA Media Are Destroying America. Dan, it's great to have you. There's so much in this book that's exactly relevant for stuff that's happening in the news today. That report from Isaac was really revealing that there are people within the White House who feel like they're not getting their message out. How true?
Definitely true. And I put myself in the top percentile of Americans sympathetic to the challenges they have. When I worked in the White House, it was hard to get our message out because the media environment was so chaotic and hyperbolic, and there was this emerging right-wing media machine that was starting to drown out our message. That problem is exponentially worse now. The White House isn't, even if you put aside all of the crises happening outside of their control that are dominating the news, the presidential bully pulpit is incredibly small. And this is the huge challenge to Democrats, is that we are losing the messaging wars because the Republicans, as I write in the book, the Republicans have spent decades building up this massive apparatus. It includes cable news, digital sites, YouTube personalities, Facebook messaging that is pushing right-wing disinformation and propaganda at the expense of normal political conversation in this country.
Is it just that, though, or are there choices that this White House is making that's making it harder for them to get their message out?
Look, I think we can stipulate that everyone can always do a better job. I think there are two parts of political communication. What are you going to say, and how do you get people to pay attention to it? Biden has nailed the first part for much of his presidency. His agenda is popular, his messaging is good, but not enough people are hearing it. And you have seen, I think, in the last few weeks, a shift in what the White House is doing. Some of it's in the CNN report you mentioned. The president's getting out more. He's been doing more interviews. He's going to be on Jimmy Kimmel tomorrow night. He did give a primetime speech. And I think they're recognizing that Democrats have to work extra hard to be omnipresent in the political conversation because we don't have an apparatus who's going to do that for us like President Trump did.
The op-eds, one of the things, and you sort of mentioned this in your book, it presaged
Yeah.
something that President Biden has tried to do. He's written 2 op-eds in the last month, one on inflation and the other, I believe, on gun safety. Is that sort of the new approach? That feels awfully old school.
Well, I think if you think of the op-eds as something that is designed only for the readers of the dead tree editions of the newspaper as they fall in, then yes, that is a very old and inefficient way of communicating. If you think of it as a way to kickstart a political conversation in the digital space where everyone is reacting to that op-ed, it doesn't really matter where it is, but you are putting content out there. You're pushing your message in every available means, right? You're doing late night shows with Jimmy Kimmel. You're doing op-eds. You're traveling. You're doing local television. You're doing progressive media. All of those things have to be part of the mix. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that from this White House now.
I want to come back to this White House in a second, but I want to focus on another thing that we're just learning, which gets to what your book is about, which is that the first night of the January 6th Select Committee hearings will be in prime time, Thursday night. All the major networks are covering them, the cables are covering them, except for Fox News will not broadcast these hearings. What does that tell you?
Well, it certainly tells me that the idea that Fox is some sort of quasi-right-leaning journalistic organization during the day and then right-wing opinion at night is completely not true, right? This is the entire operation at Fox, and it has now been amplified by a bunch of sort of Fox, like online versions of Fox, the goal is to create a hermetically sealed information bubble to dictate, to give people a specific alternative version of reality, alternative facts, as Kellyanne Conway would say, for the purposes of motivating Republican voters in winning elections. That is what it is, full stop.
That's one thing that's interesting to look at, which there is a segment of the country for which those hearings, I suppose you're saying, will not exist.
They will not exist. And it's the same thing on the economy, right? When within the right-wing media ecosystem, when Donald Trump was president, the economy was great. Jobs numbers were the single most important thing, right? It was the greatest economy in history, according to Fox. Once, obviously the economy is very complicated right now, but the idea that we are having historic job growth, one of the greatest jobs growth in history, is not a piece of information that's being communicated to a large swath of the population because right-wing media outlets and the billionaires that fund it do not want people to know that.
All right, I'm going to ask you to summarize in 30 seconds what the last third of your entire book is about. So I know it's a challenge here. But what do you do about it? It's not that Democrats in this White House don't understand.
They absolutely understand
what's happened, in what environment they are now in. So how do you beat that?
So there are no simple solutions. We are decades behind the right wing here. But there are 3 things I think we have to do. One, as a party in a progressive movement, we have to invest in progressive media. Not at the expense of mainstream media. We're not running away from it. It's an and both strategy, but we have to build up and invest in ways in which we can communicate with people and tell our story on our terms. Second, I think we have to radically rethink communications in this phase. Political communications is not public relations. It's information warfare in the digital age. So we have to be on a war footing and build up a completely different operation. Last thing is, and I think this is the only way that progressives are going to beat Republicans at this, is we have millions and millions of Democrats around this country who are taking time out of their day to text and phone call and call strangers on the phone. We have a great volunteer base. We need to turn them into a messaging army. We need to give them content and tools to spread our message. We should think of each one of them as an adjunct to the White House press secretary, they're carrying our message. And that requires a lot of work, but we all have agency here and there are things we can do, but we have to recognize understand the problem, which is why I wrote the book, to explain where this came from and how it works, and then what we can do about it.
Dan Pfeiffer, the book is Battling the Big Lie. It is out today, and it deals with things that are in the news today. Thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it, John. Great to see you. The state of Texas ordering active shooter training for all school districts in response to the Uvalde massacre. We're going to speak with a trainer in charge.
And it's not just baby formula. Supply chain issues and COVID-fueled shutdowns have impacted other critical parts of healthcare. We have Dr. Sanjay Gupta here to explain.
Growing up around individuals that were dedicated to service served as a great example for how I wanted to live my life. You grow up with the mentality of how do you support the person next to you. At Fujifilm, partnership is at the core of what we do. We partner with pharmaceutical companies to help develop and manufacture biopharmaceuticals. Being in a profession where you can help people, it's extremely motivating. It's why we're doing what we're doing.
Back in person, the 2022 Afreximbank annual meetings will bring together high-profile continental and global leaders to harness and leverage Africa's incredible potential. Register now.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
Malumnis, it's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
I'm Jenny Wassenaar, Chief Sustainability Officer at 3VM Packaging. Sustainability is an imperative for any business. If you look at the footprint of your organization, you have to make sure that by 2050 latest, you're at zero emissions. This is important for the Earth, it's important for future generations, but it's also important for your employees. So I'm expecting that businesses that do not focus on sustainability, that they will not be around for a very long time. Of course, this looks a bit like a threat, but it's actually not. It's a great opportunity for companies to embrace sustainability, take sustainability in your DNA, and make a future career and success for your business out of sustainability.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Erin Burnett out front on CNN. June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
I'm Delia Gallagher in Rome, and this is CNN.
In addition to the crisis surrounding infant formula, supply chain shortages are ensnaring other aspects of healthcare, including diagnostics. The closure of GE Healthcare's Shanghai plant because of COVID lockdowns in early April has led to a shortage of contrast dye, the medium that doctors and hospitals use in diagnostic scans like CT scans. And that has led to a delay in diagnoses and treatments. Our chief medical correspondent, Dr. Sanjay Gupta, has been investigating this issue and joins us now to tell us more. Sanjay, what does this dye do, and how can this lead to missed or delayed diagnoses?
Yeah, just like you said, this is called IV contrast. It's intravenous. It's a contrast that contains iodine, which is going to show up well if you image this on scans. You inject this into the bloodstream, and it's basically to try and find abnormalities that you might otherwise miss. Someone's having a stroke, for example, try and find exactly where the blood clot is that's causing that stroke. This is something that could come in, really be useful for that. Let me show you my world of brain imaging, why it's so useful. If you take a look at a brain image, such as this one, you may not be able to tell just exactly what's going on there. This doesn't have any contrast that's been injected. Now, if you inject the contrast, take a look, especially in the upper right corner of the scan, and you see that big, bright white spot there, Brianna. That's a tumor. That's a brain tumor called the meningioma. It's not very clear at all on the non-contrast scan. You inject the contrast, it becomes clear. Let me show you one more example. Someone who's getting their liver imaged, for example, concerned about cancer. On the left, that's the upper left corner there, the liver, I can tell you, looks pretty normal. You inject the dye again, and those two spots there that are with the yellow arrows, those are indications of areas where now you have evidence of cancer in the liver. You might have missed that if you didn't have the dye. That's why this is so important. And as you point out, Brianna, this is as a result of that zero COVID policy in Shanghai, early April to just this past week, 2 weeks, this GE healthcare plant was essentially not able to manufacture this dye. That plant, this company serves probably half the hospitals in this country in terms of providing that dye. So that's been the issue. You haven't been able to get enough of that dye over these 2 months, and we're still going to be paying the price for that for some time to come. They're ramping up production again, but it takes a while to catch up.
Sanjay, thank you so much. Incredibly alarming. These are tests, obviously, that need to be done here. So the U.S. has sent tens of billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine, but as Putin's war rages on, the question remains, what's it going to cost to rebuild? We have a reality check next.
And in a big escalation by the Justice Department, leaders of the Proud Boys have been charged with seditious conspiracy in the January 6th insurrection. The significance ahead.
Real news that shapes our world.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson today on CNN.
I always believe in karma. I believe that doing the right thing will always end up to making us even more money. Our goal is to shape a better and more sustainable food future by investing in early stage transformative technology startups to address the challenges that the food supply chain that we're facing. So we have been backing alternative protein solutions in many different forms, from the cell culture meat, fermentation-based protein, plant-based meat, plant-based dairy. First, you need to make those meatless food really tasty. And second layer is it also needs to taste like meat. So we largely look at precision agriculture. We're looking at ag-drone company, ag robotics that can help the small farmers to make smarter decisions on growing their crops to provide a better and more sustainable impact on the environment.
On Culinary Journeys, meet Japan's Natsuko Shoji, a chef earning rave reviews. Inspired by art, she is a rising star in French cuisine and in an industry where men dominate. See how she overcame life's challenges despite the odds and is now paving the way for a new generation. Culinary Journeys, Sunday on CNN, in association with Ajinomoto.